Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Kyle's Corner. Sorry we're a little bit late. Richard and Fonda were telling me all the spoilers that George R. R. Martin told them for Winds of Winter. Like, you guys missed it. It's just, Uh,
The
but I'm
secret
here
authors
with
do that.
I'm here with two authors that I really, really like. And I've read their trilogy and I'm excited for their upcoming work. We have Richard Swan on the right here, who has released the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, starting with the Justice of Kings, and then he just finished that with the Trials of Empire, and he has some more books set in that world coming out soon. And then we have Fonda Lee at the bottom here, with who has done the Green Bone Saga and the Untethered Sky novella, and some YA novellas, Zero Boxer and EXO and stuff like that, and has some exciting stuff coming up as well. So I really wanted to talk to you guys. How are you guys doing today?
Pretty well.
Very good, thank you.
Glad to be here.
Sunny 11 a.m. morning here in Sydney.
Yeah, Richard, you strike me as a morning person.
Yeah, well, I have had to become a morning person because I've got 3 small children. The youngest of which is 7 months old. So 5:30 start is every day now. When I used to be dreadful at mornings, and to the point where I actually left the Army Reserve once because I just couldn't be bothered to get up. Like, you know what? I'm done. The early mornings, these are killing me. I quit, and so I've had to become one. So, but it is quite late in the morning here. It's about 11 a.m. So,
I used to be the same. I used to be more of a night owl,
right.
And same thing, Richard. My kids beat that out of me, and now they're older. So the irony is, they become teenagers, and then they completely flip on you, and then they become like late night folk.
Yeah,
and you are now like now not a morning person or a night person. So now I'm just like sort of equally unproductive.
Just constantly tired.
Yeah. Like,
nothing works. It's nothing's touching the sides anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I'm a night person and my wife is a morning person, and I have deluded myself into thinking when we have kids that'll just equal out. I know I'm wrong, but don't tell me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it sounds great in theory. It's one of those things that's like, this
everyone
how it should work, but
Yeah.
We have Shad in the chat here who says he's a huge fan of both of your series, so he's excited for you guys.
Oh, thanks, man.
And Evie just wants us to talk Winds of Winter theories, so
not going to get much from us.
There is
you set us up, Kyle. You're going to be able to deliver on your expectations.
So my first question for you guys is very general. Just what have you been reading lately? Richard, do you want to go first?
Yeah. I've been reading. So do you know Simon Roy? Hold on, I can see it right there. So I got into a book called Prophet. It's actually a graphic novel years ago, and it was mind-blowingly good. And so I've been going through Simon Roy's. He's a Canadian graphic novelist, and I've just picked up I kickstarted his latest, and as part of that, I got all of his back catalogue in hardcover. So, and with these lovely kind of foiled edges. So this is Refugium by Simon Roy and a few other colorists and drawers and all the rest of it. So I'm working my way through that, and I am also just reading a book about the Crusades, of all things, which is just endlessly fascinating. And I always have some sort of World War II fiction on the back, non-fiction on the back burner, because I'm a 35-year-old white guy. So I got to keep that expectation. Yeah.
Got to hit all the right boxes. Yeah,
that's it. I got to fulfill people's expectations of me.
Fonda, what about you?
I am oddly enough, very uncharacteristically, reading short fiction, and I'm not a short fiction person. I've always been a novel. I occasionally write some short fiction, but have not historically been a big consumer of short fiction. But I'm in the midst of doing drafting 2 novels, and I don't know if you ever run into this, Richard, but sometimes it's hard to maintain focus on reading other novels when you're trying to drafting your
novel reading has dropped off a cliff. Yeah.
So I often try to mix it up. Maybe they're doing audiobooks or graphic novels or what have you. So right now it's short stories. So I had read Ted Chiang's Exhalation some years ago, and I was like, I got to go read all of his other stuff, backlist stuff. So I'm reading some of that, and then I'm teaching a class this weekend, and the theme is Octavia Butler. or this is in honor of Octavia Butler. So
Right.
I've been catching up on some. I've read like a few of her works, but I hadn't actually read some of the more well-known ones like Kindred and then Bloodchild and Other Stories in Short Story Collection. So
Yeah.
I picked that up, and yes, I've been working my. And then occasionally I also have this like staggering pile of arcs of like books that look great
Yes.
that I hope to get to in over the
You know,
holidays.
I keep getting sent them, and I don't. It's funny because obviously as a fantasy author, I don't actually read that much fantasy. And I never have read a tremendous amount of it. I was always more of a sci-fi reader growing up. But so I get like you, I get sent a few arcs here and there, but it's very infrequently that one really kind of catches my eye. But I just saw this morning, in fact, it's got Mark Latham, I think. He's got a book coming out called The Last Vigilant, The Last Vigilant, and it's got this incredible cover. It's like this.
Yeah, I just saw the cover today. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's like this kind of like
Oh
very
gosh, I gotta look
90s
this up.
American, classic 90s American fantasy style cover, very reminiscent of Eye of the World. And it was so striking. And I immediately emailed Bradley at Orbit US, and I was like, you got to send me one of these. This looks cool. So I'm looking forward to getting that. Should be arriving. So that's probably the first fantasy novel I'll have read for quite a long time, I think. But that one looks awesome. I'm looking forward to reading that.
That's why covers are so important. You know,
100%.
like, yeah, like there's been some times where
I
I
have
have
to look
absolutely
this
no
up now.
interest, and I'm just like, oh, I'm into that one. But
Yeah.
Fonda, I do want to ask you, how did you like Kindred? Because Kindred is spectacular. I thought, like, just
Yeah.
absolutely blown
No,
away.
I'm super enjoying it.
Yeah.
I haven't finished it yet,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's such a like yeah, it's well loved for a reason, and such an it's kind of hits like the history and portal fantasy, and yeah, so yeah,
Very cool.
really enjoying
Yeah,
it
no,
so far.
that book is absolutely tremendous. I think I read it in a day, and then after that, I was like, nobody talked to me. Like, I just,
Wow.
yeah. So I had a sort of similar question to Anitha here, so I'm going to fold them into one. She said, "What are the 3 books that inspired you to write?" And my question was going to be, "What are your 3 desert island books?" So if you can answer either one or both, whichever one's more meaningful to you. Fonda, do you
Oh
want to start with that
gosh.
one?
Yeah,
Oh.
Fonda. Okay.
These questions are the worst. I feel like as an author, people are always they're always asking you like, what are your desert island books, and what are the most formative books? I find it very hard to pin down.
I always like, can I take a series in like
yeah,
an
exactly.
omnibus form? I'll have one of those,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Are you guys listers? Like, do you guys in your head kind of like, oh, this is one of my favorite whatever's, or you just love stuff in tiers? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know. I have it for me, and I think sorry, Fonda, I've completely cut
Yeah.
across you. Have you got
Go
your
ahead.
list ready?
I definitely
No.
don't, so keep talking.
You don't. Okay. I for me, it's the books that kind of stick in my mind are still the ones I read as kind of like a teenager, and I think that the books that we read as adults, I'm 35 now, and the books that I read now are and that I really connect with and really enjoy are the ones that remind me of that time, which is, and it's it's diminishing returns, right? The more you read and the more genre savvy you become, the harder it is to find that hidden gem that really kind of hits that nostalgic, that brief fleeting high. The one that really, really did that for me recently, apart from the Green Bone Saga, which I really enjoyed, Fonda, was, as you know, was Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. I adored that book, and that was like that sparked something in my brain which I loved. So that would be one of them. I think would be Senlin Ascends. What else would I take? I think the last time I asked this question, I said the Green Bone Saga, which was maybe a bit smoke blowy, but I really did love that series. Jade City, especially, I think, and that was a phenomenal book. And I
Jade
think what it
Legacy
did,
supremacy here.
Jade Legacy was also excellent. I think with Jade City, well, they were all excellent, but I think with Jade City, what it did, and it kind of did what I just said, which was very occasionally you'll get one of those books where you actually kind of look forward to reading it in the evening, because I'm one of these people who just reads like 10 pages before bed. I used to read about a book a week on my commute into my law firm. but I don't do that anymore. So my reading has dropped off a cliff. But very, very occasionally I'll come across a book where I'm like, I just got to know what happens in this thing. And I'll look forward to that evening kind of 40 minutes where I'm like turning the pages. And Jade City was the one in recent memory that I read. I think I read it about 4 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago. That just really, again, just tickled my brain in that way. And I was like, I got to find out what happens in this book. It's just so propulsive. So yeah, I would take that would be my second pick. I think Green Bone. I'm gonna put my money where my mouth is. My very dog-eared copies of it. I've asked Broken Binding to send me the really fancy new set. I was like, come on, Matt, send me a.
Yeah, those ones are
Give me.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
He sent
very
me with
pretty.
the Benito Street Station. I was like, oh, do Green Bone as well. Jesus.
I mean, at the risk of sounding like I'm just, going right back at you, Richard, Justice of Kings was one of the ones that I was like, after I read it, it was and like I get a lot of arcs, and there's only a few that I end up like recommending to a ton of people.
Sure.
And I remember like reading Justice of Kings, being like, "This is fantasy lawyers. This is
Yeah,
awesome!"
I know, yeah.
Oh my God.
That's why
I just love that. So yeah, like it's so cool.
Thank you.
But I mean, Kyle, I think one of the difficulties when you ask authors these questions is it's hard to kind of separate books that inspired you or that were formative, that made you become a writer, because they're not even necessarily like the best books you've read, right? They just hit you at like a right time, or it had this impact on you, usually in adolescence or like as an early adult. Versus the sort of critical eye that you have when you are yourself a writer and you're in that, that milieu, and you just get there's so much stuff that something has to really kind of rise to the surface and hit you in a different way. And maybe it's not as formative because at that point you're like established. You're an adult. You're calcified.
Yeah, so, that's right.
But there are those ones like that just like pop up and they still make an impact. Like recently. So yeah, like Justice Kings. I recently read Robert Jackson Bennett's new book, Tainted Cup, which I love
Tainted Cup. Yeah.
So like there's a few that like every once in a while you read something and you're like, oh yeah, absolutely, this is my jam. Right. But if I were to be like, oh, what are the books that made me want to write? I have to really, I think, credit finding the genre authors in my teens. So I think Anne McCaffrey was one of them for me, the Dragon Riders of Pern. I think one of the reasons why she inspired me to write is because she blended genre in like a way that was different from sort of like a bunch of traditional fantasy that I had up until that point read. And I had, consumed all the sort of usual stuff that you have as on the fantasy shelves, right? Lord of the Rings and Narnia and Dane Chronicles. And Anne McCaffrey did something cool because one, it was dragons and animal companions, which I like. I had a whole stint when I was a teenager where I just like wanted to read all of that stuff. But as it went on, it was like, oh no, wait, this isn't straight fantasy. It's science fiction and sort of the trappings of fantasy. And that scratched my itch. Like I'm kind of now realizing that that's just something that works with my brain, like fantasy, but almost like treated in a science fictional way.
Yeah,
and that won't surprise anybody who's read Green Bone Saga.
Read Green Bone, yeah.
That's one of them. And then for Desert Island book, I mean, I have to bring The Godfathers because it's such a formative, book.
So do you like the movie or the book better for The Godfather?
Goodness.
Because I've never read the book, but I just got the audiobook because it's narrated by Joe Menton. I don't know how to say his name, but and I want to read it, but I'm like, The Godfather is so like the way we all think of the story that it might be a little jarring to me.
Yeah. The movie is better in terms of its construction,
right?
In terms of the way the story is told, it's better. But Godfather, the novel, is because it's the source material and just the way that like how formative a novel it was for me, even though there's things about it that are like super really weird, and it's kind of terrible in some ways, but it's just also such a great novel. It's one of those like you can't.
Right. You can't
Sure.
like it hit you at the right point, and it's just there now. Yeah.
Mm.
Robin from Only the Best Fantasy Novel says, swamped at work, but I ran up to the roof just so I could let Fonda Lee know I loved Breath of the Dragon. Kudos. And we've
Oh,
been
thank
having
you
a
so
couple of
much.
Literally shouting it from the
questions.
rooftops.
We have had a couple questions about your guys' upcoming works. I was going to save that for the end, but since people are asking now, I will just say you guys both have books coming out in the next couple months, and Fonda might have another book coming out at the end of the year. I'll let you talk about that. But so we have Breath of the Dragon from Fonda Lee, which is co-authored by Shannon Lee, and Richard is releasing Grave Empire in, I think it's February 4th is the date for that
Yes,
one.
that's right.
And
Yeah, that's right.
I'm so excited.
Fonda, since we had the question or the comment about Breath of the Dragon, do you want to tell us about that and how that came about real quick?
Yes, completely unexpectedly. So I had finished the Green Bone Saga and was sort of in a recovery phase after that, which you can probably appreciate. So I at that point was set with my like next project so I'd finished the Green Bone Saga. I worked on a novella, some short stories, this other novella, Untethered Sky, and I had plans for like the other novels that I was gonna write with Orbit, and I got a call out of the blue from it was from my agent, but basically like, oh, Shannon Lee would like to talk to you, and it's not sort of the thing that happens every day. So I was like, yeah, of course I'll take that call. And as it turns out, Shannon is a fan of fantasy, and she was really interested in writing a young adult fantasy novel series that was inspired by her father, his philosophy, his life, his films, and but she's not a novelist herself, obviously, and was looking for a writer to partner with on it. And at the time, I was like, I don't know if I can fit this into the schedule, but I took the call. We hit it off. Grew up huge Bruce Lee fan. He was just so formative for me, not just as obviously his films, as a storyteller, as a martial artist, as an Asian American who broke all sorts of molds. So I took the call and started. She had written more of an initial treatment based on some of her father's unpublished film scripts and some ideas of her own, and I was like, yeah, I can totally see where I would go with this. And she has been extremely collaborative and given me a ton of creative freedom. So in a way, it felt like I was just writing Bruce Lee fanfic, which was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So yeah, we put together a proposal, sold it as a duology, and like now the first book is coming out in
Amazing.
like a month. And I've got a second book that I'm working with her on that will be called Mark of the Warrior, and that will hopefully come out in about another year and a half. And then on the science fiction side, I have a standalone science fiction novel called The Last Contract of Isako that has been somewhat delayed due to the fact that I'm also doing this other project.
Yeah,
but I'm getting there. I'm in revisions, and hopefully that'll come out, if not the end of next year, then like the beginning of 2026.
I hate those publishing lead times.
Yes.
It's sold. I was just telling Carl before we came on the call, which I can't talk about unfortunately, but I sold this series to a different publisher, and they were like, oh, great, yeah, and this is going to be like 2026, and this is this. Right. I saw at the beginning of this year. I was like, oh my god, like my current baby is going to be over 2 years old, and like when I start measuring it in my kids' ages, and it puts it into perspective.
Yeah.
Like, it's such
Can
a
you
long
talk
time.
about the new series? So this is separate from.
This is something else completely. Unfortunately, I can't.
Okay.
I've signed one contract, but not the other yet. So it's across two publishers transatlantically. But it is sci-fi, and it's a series I'm very, very, very excited about. Very political, a little bit dystopian, but I can't say anything about it, sadly. But when it hits, I'm really excited about it, so that's cool. But in terms of the stuff I can talk about, yes, got Grave Empire coming out in February, which is set in the same Empire of the Wolf universe world, but 200 years after the Empire of the Wolf. So I wanted to originally, like when I originally spoke to my editors at Orbit, I said I want to do a trilogy of trilogies, and in between each trilogy is like a couple of 100 years, and they're all standalone trilogies, so you don't have to have read any of them. Or you could read them out of sequence. It doesn't really matter. Don't read the trilogies out of sequence, obviously, because that'll be nonsense. But read the 3 books out of sequence. That's fine. So I've taken the Empire of the Wolf up to kind of the Flintlock era, which I'm just kind of hitting all of the stuff I'm interested in now because I'm a big non-fiction history reader. So I thought, oh man, I got to do like a sort of Napoleonic era type fantasy next. So I've done all of that with the cannons and the warships and all that's been great fun, and I've tried again grounded it in quite well, at least the first book, in quite realistic. So I've got like actual Age of Sail non-fiction that I've been reading through, getting all the terminology right, and that's been a lot of fun for me. So it'll hopefully it reads quite smoothly, but there's been a tremendous amount of actual technical research behind it. So that's been great. Again, sort of apocalyptic ghouls and demons and sort of eldritch horrors, but in the kind of Flintlock era. So very
nice.
So great, all that good stuff. And this time I pivoted towards kind of international foreign relations now. So we're kind of ambassadors, and we're at kind of international diplomacy. And so if Empire of the Wolf is all like legal, this is all like international diplomacy. And I did a few modules of that at university, international public law and things like that. So counterterrorism and that sort of thing. So there's all that good stuff still in there, all that kind of a frisson of Richard Swan, global war on terror era, good stuff all baked in. So looking forward to that. Really looking forward to that one coming out. And then I can talk about in October. I've got a new novella coming out, which is a Von Volt Empire of the Wolf, but prequel. So it's before Justice of the Kings. So it'll have Von Volt and Bressinger in it. Kicking ass and taking names.
I'm so excited for that because I remember you telling me about it, Richard, and you're like, "This is going to be like the chewy fantasy police procedural."
That's right.
And I was like,
"Yeah,
sign me up." That is.
Exactly. You can have it.
I also love those 2 characters, so it's like perfect to just like get back to reading about them before all the stuff that happens in Justice of Kings happens. So,
I think that'll be a nice kind of just a good old dark fantasy procedural. I'll get a bit of legal stuff in there as well.
So Richard, I have a question. So when you were writing Empire of the Wolf trilogy, did you at what point did you think about this trilogy of trilogy ideas? Like, did you know that there was this other trilogy that you wanted to tackle like 200 years in the future?
I did, and I thought what would be a nice touch is to have like, especially the stuff that happens in the sort of the holy dimensions or the kind of afterlife, like that carry on and almost like a separate timeline. So even though hundreds of years have passed in the mortal world, time moves very differently there. So there's still quite a lot of familiarity in that on that side of things. But apart from like a few kind of nods and Easter eggs and things, I wanted it to be separate so that because otherwise people see it and they're like, oh, it's set in the same world as Empire of the Wolf. Well, I'm not, I haven't read Empire of the Wolf, so I'm not going to buy it. So I thought, it really must be its own thing. But it was really then about deciding how to tell each story, because obviously the first trilogy is a first-person account from Helena, and the second trilogy is very much like a mixed third-person POV, more kind of and so I'm just trying to think. With the third trilogy, which I haven't sold, by the way, this is all completely speculative. Although, do I, go back to first person? Do I make it like an epistolary, or do I kind of play with the format a little bit? So I'm still kind of, because I've written the second book of the current trilogy, I've got the third one to write, but I'll finish it next year, so I'll have lots of time to kind of plan the next books. But I did have it in mind, and so I was trying to think of like what little things can I kind of insert in this trilogy that I can draw on 2 centuries down the line. So I've got this thing called the Spear of Vangrid, which appears in book 3. So it's a golden spearhead, which is just basically the Spear of Destiny. And I was like, right, I'm going to kind of have this, and this is going to become a thing in like my World War I era trilogy, but I'm going to seed it now, and so it's kind of, I'm just constantly looking hundreds of years ahead to see what I can unearth, so that the really eagle-eyed readers can be like, oh fuck, I remember this thing. This is from that Trials of Empire book, and so it's been fun to kind of lay the foundations and pull things through like that.
It sounds
That's
great.
very cool. Yeah.
It's also nice that you didn't like put a numbering into your magic system, because fans have now convinced Brandon Sanderson to do extra Mistborns, because the magic system is 16, and I think he was going to do 12 or something like that. And everybody was like, 16 is like the number, you put it.
Oh,
and he's like,
God.
wow, that's good. And I think like the last Dragonsteel, he announced he's probably going to do like another trilogy and I'm just like, man, you locked yourself into that one. So, a trilogy of trilogies, and then you're done.
Don't give it a number. Yeah, for sure.
No, I mean,
For sure.
I thought I was being ambitious with the one trilogy I did. So trilogy of trilogies sounds...
Well, they're fun, and I just got all this. I also got, you have all this kind of like wonderful world building, because they got all these maps and countries and things, and I thought, how fun it would be to kind of see how the maps of Orbit let me do 2 maps in the second trilogy, which I was very excited about. And so you've got all these like countries, and you can see etymologically how the names of them change over time,
Right.
and how the countries kind of like concatenate or fracture. And so it's just another layer you can add to it, where you're like, oh, I remember that used to be this country, now it's got this name, and these people used to be black. And so I think what people will enjoy about the middle trilogy is just a depth to the world building, which is really because it enabled me to kind of just pull through from the old trilogy and kind of nerd out on the toponymy and geography of it all, which was fun. Sorry, I'll stop talking now.
No worries. This is what we're here for, right?
That's very cool.
Yeah,
I think it's you're tempting me in potentially dangerous ways, Richard, because people have asked, would you ever go back to the Green Bone Saga world? Would
you
ever, write
surely you're going to.
And I've always said no, I'm done with that story. That was the story I wanted to tell. And I feel like I've said all I need to say about that. But I'm also not I'm also a never say never person, because I said I was done, and then I ended up writing a novella and some short stories because I just wanted to stay in the world some more. But I think the only way. Oh yes.
Don't sell them all. Keep one back for.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
I will, Richard. Don't worry. But I'm with you in that, the only way I would go back to the world is if it was something completely different. It'd have to be separated by enough time and distance, and different characters, and its own entry point. And nothing's kind of. I mean, I've occasionally thought, because the Green Bone Saga has these little historical interludes where it's the mythology of the world, and at times I've been like, that would be cool if I just did a whole series and it was just the Warring Sisters period, or whatever. Sort of a more traditional, right, the Many Nations War area. So there's parts in there, but the challenge, this, I keep coming back to this, the struggle of, but it'd be kind of like doing the prequel series of Star Wars, where how it ends, right? Because because you're going back in time.
I'm going to join Richard here, trying to strong arm you.
That's right. I'm sure.
Have either of you watched Better Call Saul? Because I have a very particular. So Better Call Saul's biggest problem is that everybody's fate is dealt with, and there's a scene in Better Call Saul that I think is brilliant that I haven't seen people talk about, where one person in that show, Mike, is tasked to kill someone who we know is not dead in Breaking Bad. So the entire tension of the episode is we know this guy doesn't die, and we know he doesn't succeed in doing this. So how do you get it to work? And they just sideswipe the question entirely by making an entirely different, unexpected thing happen that you're now invested in to do that. And I think so many prequels fall into the trap of trying to answer the question that they don't expect the swerve. So I think all you got to do, Fonda, is just focus on telling the story you want to tell.
Yeah, that's
and
it,
don't worry about connecting it to Hilo's barber or something.
Don't overthink it.
Although, that's true. It'd have to be something but it would have to be, I think, I don't know how you're doing it, Richard, because I feel like I still don't have enough distance from the characters in the Green Bone Saga to be able to write something completely different in their world. I would be constantly be like, okay, but does that does that become Hilo's barber? Like, you know, is that
Yeah.
descendant? You know, like I
Yeah.
feel like I'm still too close to those characters, and
The
they.
third one came out a few years
You
ago,
know,
right? You must be 2 or 3 years clear from it.
I am now the third. So the third book came out 2021, and then the novella and the short stories came out in
Yeah, right.
22. It's been about 2 years. Yeah.
I think changing the setting completely helped, and I've always said Helena's story is done. Like I don't think I'll
Yeah.
ever revisit her particularly, but I think there's a few. I think Von Volt there's a seam to mine there, and I think he's just such a interesting and compelling character to kind of you know do, as a lens through which to view these kind of investigations, and fantasy kind of police procedurals are really fun to write. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm happy to sort of do that, but I think I think it would be, unless I had as you say, it's got to be the right idea. And I wouldn't want to just kind of do what Disney is doing with Star Wars and just like churn
Right.
out
Yeah.
1,000
Just
hours of
cash
content
cow it is. Yeah.
garbage.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have to be something good, and it would have to be something that I feel would justify returning to say, as you say, never say die, but I deliberately left the third book open-ended. I gave myself some wiggle room in case 10 years time I was like, actually that is, because there's a Black Library trilogy called Eisenhorn, which I loved, and which is sort of the inspirations for Von Vol. And Eisenhorn is like this inquisitor. I don't know if you're familiar with the Warhammer 40,000 universe, but he's this like inquisitor in this kind of like church Nazi police state. And it's a very, very good series. And then he did a fourth novel. And initially I was like, I don't know, man. Like the original trilogy was really good. I don't know how I feel about a fourth book. I felt like it ended nicely. And then I read the fourth book and I was like, actually, that was really good. So I'm back in now. So, I think you should, all this is in aid of to say, Fonda, give us more Green Bone and give it to us soon.
I agree. I think we all agree.
I think we
I
all
speak
agree.
for the whole fandom. I polled them right before
We're
we.
pushing on an open door here.
Yeah. It's funny because what I was actually going to say earlier is one of the reasons that I wanted to get you both on is that. So if I was just to pitch either of your series to somebody, they're very different. Like I don't think they're similar, but there's a lot of interesting similarities between them. And the contrast in the differences is what I find really interesting. So they're both trilogies where you guys brought your niches to like very specialized interests. Like, Fonda, you were in corporate boardrooms and you also did martial arts. And you were like, what if I just did that and also like fantasy, Asia
a few times.
Yep.
And then Richard was, like, what if I just had a lawyer just running around being like,
what if
actually, this is the law. So, and you guys start with kind of like the small area that they're engaging with. And I would say one of the themes of both series is the moral question of how things evolve in a changing time. You have these characters that have a very strong idea of what's right and wrong. And then as the events of your series go on, some of them make very questionable decisions that some of us might not be over yet. And the scale goes bigger and bigger. You see different nations in each of these trilogies. And then the third book just explodes in both of you guys' series, brings in all sorts of stuff. And Richard is doing things the right way by continuing, and Fonda's making us all.
I thought you were going to say, I thought you were going to make a quality judgment on the book set. And I was like, that's dangerous territory, buddy. Richard did a good third book, whereas Fonda did a bad third book.
No, not at all.
Richard has more stamina. Fonda pieced out. That's what you're saying.
Richard has staying power. Yeah.
Oh, no. No, I like both endings of the trilogies. Both great endings. But I want more Green Bone, selfishly. So maybe one day. Yeah. So one question I did want to ask though, in relation to that, is when you were working in these like specific niches that you guys have a lot of like expertise in, did it start with like, I want to write law in fantasy, or I want to have, economics and, corporate boardrooms and all this kind of stuff in a fantasy series? Or did you start writing it and just because it's something that you love and know a lot, you're like, I could include this? Richard, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Did the cart come first or the horse? I was walking through the lobby of my law firm building in sort of London in about 2017 or 2018, I think it was. And I had just read Imperium by Robert Harris, which is an excellent novel.
Fantastic.
Excellent book. Yeah, very good.
And
So good.
I was like, what if fantasy lawyers like, and I was trying to kind of think about my job, and and my initial thought was I should do like, they have like vocal, like, what are the lawyers, it's like vocal, like advocacy magic. So they're in the courtroom, but they use like the power of almost like the Bene Gesserit power of speech to. And I was like, mechanically that doesn't work. That just makes the whole court procedures completely redundant. So I scaled it back a bit, and I had this idea for then. I'd written a short story a few months before, I think it was, about Von Volt, and it got rejected by BCS, I think it was. But it's kind of traveling itinerant, magistrate, and I kind of combined the two. I thought, well, what if he was everything? What if he was like essentially like an inquisitor? He was like an investigator and a judge and a jury and the whole shebang. And then I thought, as much as you've just said, if it had in this time of kind of transition where he's existing as the kind of the physical infrastructure, legal infrastructure starts to kind of radiate out from Sova and populate the different urban centers in the different conquered territories, this idea of a traveling itinerant court becomes more and more redundant, and they're more and more confined to the kind of the hinterlands. So there's kind of this great change of modernization, and he's becoming a bit outmoded. So there was that in the background, and so it enabled me, I think, to play with this idea of because one of the biggest challenges I had was, well, if he can just get the truth out of people with the emperor's voice, what's the need for any of the rest of it? That was one of the big, and so then I had to kind of start thinking about ways of limiting that power. And that gave me the idea for the with the necromancy. I thought, well, what if you can question a murder victim who killed you, but you might get eaten by a demon if you do it. So it's always about limiting. And so for me, it was a mixture of sort of a long-running idea I had of fantasy lawyers, and then like a few kind of key catalysts. Where again, I read that Robert Harris book, and I was like, that's and I with the Robert Harris book, I was like, oh well, Tiro the slave tells the story of Cicero. And I was like, I love that mechanic. Like, what a brilliant mechanic to kind of so that you're not spoiling the thoughts and feelings and rationale and reasoning of this great man of history, but rather you're seeing it through a lens, and it adds another layer of interesting character dynamic and complexity to the book. So it was a mixture of different, as these things always are. Is a mixture of different things that just kind of all came together in one go, and again, just and nearly didn't. And I was playing The Witcher, I think, at the time, The Witcher Wild Hunt on my Xbox, and I was like, oh man, I love this kind of setting, this beautiful kind of East European. My wife's got a sort of Lithuanian heritage, so I was like, oh, I'm steeped in this kind of beautiful East European setting. So which I made quite miserable, but and all these things kind of came together. So it was and then with the marine insurance scam, which is ultimately what Justice Kings is about, which I love reminding people. Again, that was just like taken directly from my, it's just marine insurance fraud. I was just taken directly from my work. I was like, all right, what can I just take that I'm working on? I'll just sort of crowbar it into the novel. So but no one got murdered in the real life case, I hasten to add. That was just straight fraud. And so it was a mixture of things really that kind of just hit this melting pot, and all at the same time, and it just this kind of light bulb went off, and I just then wrote the novel. So that was a bit of a halfway house answer to your question. The answer is somewhere in the middle. If I can put it that way. But Fonda, I don't know if you have a different story or
Honestly, when I started writing Green Bone Saga, all I had was kind of vibes. Sure. I didn't have a plot, characters, anything like that. I just had stuff that I wanted to mash together. And that like old adage, right? Like write what you know. But but it's not.
I hate that adage.
I hate that adage too. But there is like there is a kernel of truth in it, right? Which is that right. You draw on, you put yourself into every book that you write in some way. So when I was writing the Green Bone Saga, it always just like made sense to me that that these clans, these organizations, they'd be wielding their power through economics, through business. And because of my background, of course, like whenever I make fantasy worlds, my brain always goes to, well, how does this like place work, like economically speaking, right? Like what are the like the international implications, the trade implications of like the speculative element, the jade. Like of course, like jade would be dug up. There would be a cartel to control it if it was like this national resource that would be a huge part of the economy, right? So like there's just all these like follow-on implications once you create a world that has like some sort of magical element or
That's
some
right.
high tech. And so that stuff was just like it was fun for me because I ended up going down these research rat holes of like researching, the De Beers diamond cartel and
Sure.
the drug cartels in Mexico and like the trade, the flow of black market goods between like the US and Mexico, and like how the Cosa Nostra actually work like economically, and like where they have their tentacles in business and entertainment and all this. So I loved finding out like little nuggets of the real world. And combining them with just sort of like personal experience of having been in corporate America for 10 years and kind of weaving that all together. And I have like a great little memory of when Jade City came out, and I was doing a book signing, and a reader came up to me, and I'm signing her book, and she said, "I'm an accountant, and I just want to thank you for putting forensic accounting into a fantasy novel. I just felt
So
really
good,
represented." And I was like, see, this is you never know, like
Thank
how
you. Yeah.
when your
Right?
ideal reader is going to show up in that way.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a fun thing. But yeah, like Kyle, I think that like, I don't know, I never go into a book kind of necessarily, with a like, oh, I want, it's not like, oh, I'm going to try and like write business into a fantasy novel. I just have a story. I just have characters. Just kind of like, it just sort of evolves because of what you're bringing to it naturally.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow that up with something that Bengus Khan said, which is I agree with. Which he said, "Well, Greenborn is of course inspired by real-world organized crime. I hate when people call them organized crime novels, since the clans are something very different and new, legally sanctioned political and social organizations that have an important and public role in the social fabric of Kekon." Now, I remember when I first finished Greenbone, and I had lots of arguments with people over this because they'd be like, "Oh, they're mafia." I'm like, "Well, they're literally not. They're inspired by mafia. They are in fact legally sanctioned. It is not a crime novel." And it's just interesting how people just like they're killing people. I'm like, murder's legal. I don't know what to tell you. They can murder people.
They're legally dueling. Yeah. It's kind of it's interesting that you say that, Kyle, because you're absolutely right. That like it's not an organized crime novel, but it's obviously pulling so much inspiration from organized crime fiction and media. So it presents kind of this double-edged sword challenge for me, because on one hand, I don't think of it as, or the clans as, organized crime, because I didn't want to write a fantasy novel that was cops and robbers, right? Which is like what so much mafia fiction and gangster movies are, right? There has to be like this element of they're doing everything illegally, and there's always the threat of law enforcement and the RICO Act and all that, right? Like I didn't want that to be a key element of the story. I wanted everything that these clans were doing to be really interwoven into the fabric of their society, and for them to be operating, legitimately, but within the context of like this very specific cultural framework that they have because of Jade and their like this warrior caste that evolved there. So on one hand, you're right, it's not organized crime. On the other hand, that's a shorthand for me to kind of pitch it, right? If I'm able to say like, hey, it's the Godfather with like magic and kung fu, then people are like, oh, okay. So it's tough because on one hand, like I don't want to lean too far in that one direction, but it's also the quickest, easiest elevator pitch. I'm always torn.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough too, because like I've seen people who won't touch Greenbone because they're like, I don't like The Godfather. And I'm like, I know lots of people who have just give it a try. Like I have friends who don't like anything organized crime. And then they read Greenbone and they're like, I loved it. Like, so it's just like, it's really hard to know how to pitch somebody.
It's like to my mind, it's almost just a family drama, isn't it?
It's a family
I agree.
Ultimately, it's two warring families, and that's neglects the kind of the human angle at your peril. And I think when I look back at the kind of fiction I was reading as a teenager, the stuff that I really vibed with was the stuff that I read a lot of space opera, and I used to read like a lot of Peter Hamilton and Ian Banks. especially. And what they did really well was, in and amongst these vast, galactic empires, or whatever, it was always about the human story. And it seems, I mean, it sounds like something obvious to say, but I think we as people love that almost like telenovela style drama of families having arguments with each other and conflicting. And I think that's the engine of the Green Bone Saga ultimately, isn't it? It's the I don't want to give any spoilers, but with the unexpected death in the middle of the Ned Stark-esque death in the middle of Jade City, and it's just sort of petrol on the fire. And you've got the people. It's kind of like Succession, right? The people waiting in the wings are very dysfunctional, each in their own way, but now are responsible for essentially operating half the de facto government of the island. And so it's going to be a total fucking mess. The question is and that's why it's so good. But it's you've got these big kind of characters with their you've got Hilo, who's the kind of the hothead, and Shay, who's the kind of the more level-headed one, but she's got her own issues as well, and always feeling a bit overlooked because she's XYZ. And so you've got these people who are destined to clash, and that's the engine which drives the story. So, and everything else is happening around it. And of course, as the trilogy goes on, the scope becomes broader, and you can go to other countries and the rest of it. But ultimately, it's still those clashes which kind of hold the reader's attention, and that's probably why it's been such a successful trilogy. So even it's not even an organized crime novel in my mind. It's more of like it's a family saga, which just happens to have all the other elements.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I think
Fonda?
that's why, like, even though The Godfather is like the comp that I use, it's not because of the organized crime element that I use it. It's because it's like, oh, these happen. This is a story about a family, just they happen to be mafia. So that's kind of like what I hope at the end, that like the takeaway is that at the heart of the story is this family. And I think I'm curious, Richard, about like how you thought about the structure of the 3 books when you were writing Empire of the Wolf, because for me, I was writing Jade Legacy during the pandemic. And I remember just having this like, this like fear of like, I have to nail this ending. Like I cannot go out in a global pandemic with an unfinished trilogy. So I remember like very disciplined about like what went into the trilogy and what didn't. And my litmus test was always like, does it come back to the family? Like the family has to be the organizing principle of like this thing, so it doesn't become 4 or 5 or 6 books. Did you have something like that
I definitely
sort of like the organizing principle?
For me, it was the relationship between Helena and Von Volt, and basically and that's the golden thread exactly that runs through the story. And so you start the book 1 with Von Volt being this kind of inscrutable, he's everything, and Helena is kind of Helena's. I think some people misunderstand, to my mind at least, and I do believe in sort of death of the author, but with Helena, I think people sometimes complain that she's a bit kind of like whiny and pathetic. And I was trying to avoid, I think one of the common misconceptions about people who kind of grow up on the streets or who have like really rough upbringings, and I have sort of, not personal, but tangential experience of this, is actually there's this idea that it makes you tough and resilient. And the reality is it actually just destroys you from the inside out, and it grinds you down to the nub. And so what I wanted to kind of capture with Helena was someone who had been basically a ward of the state for many years and had latched on to what looked like stability in Von Volt and become almost totally dependent on him. And as Von Volt sort of begins to change, it's only then which kind of triggers her to become more independent of him. And so as the kind of scales fall away from her eyes in the second book, and then in the third book even more. And so we end up with them kind of doing this, over the course of the trilogy. And that was my guiding principle, where I was like, I want Helena to basically become Von Volt, but the version of him that she wished he had always been.
Right.
And that was and that was the core of the book. So which is why the last kind of like 3 or 4 chapters of Justice of Kings is just them, of Trials of Empire is the falling action, they call it. Is just them kind of reconciling.
I loved all that stuff though. Like their relationship is I mean, I also like kind of like found family aspect of the whole group, but definitely the
Yeah.
core relationship of Von Volt and Helena
thanks, man,
is
yeah.
just great. And the
Mhm,
way that
mhm.
trying to avoid spoilers, the way that the whole arc of that relationship goes,
Yeah.
I found realistic in the situations that they were in, and also just like very moving. So like, I think you nailed it.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to say that, and you know what, and I was trying to kind of strive, because I know that there was some controversy, might be making myself and the book sound a bit too important, but I think there was a bit of controversy around the turn that the relationship took in book 2, and a lot of people thought that I was trying to kind of make it a romantic thing, and it wasn't. It was never supposed to be that. It was more of like an expression of their proximity and the extremely complex and unhealthy dynamic that existed
Mhm,
between
mhm.
them, and that and that sort of, you know, and it informs and resolves, you know, in the way that it does in book 3. And it was always about, like, you've got these two people, you know, in a different time as well. We're not talking at modern day. It's not like an age. It's not supposed to be like an age gap romance. It's kind of like these people, and they get this in the medieval era. They're working together, and naturally they form these attachments, and it's about how those attachments either crystallize or break. And so as time goes on, and I think some of the perception around, especially in Tyranny of Faith, is like, oh no, he's made them like a couple, and I'm like, it's not really the kind of angle I was going for. It was more of, and so when you, Kyle, when you say thank you, that you sort of, it felt like it developed in a sort of realistic way. Ultimately, that, and it was supposed to be kind of a messy and
Yeah.
disagreeable.
I mean, I read it
relationship.
kind of as a codependency
Exactly that.
situation.
Yeah, I agree too.
Right?
Yeah,
Like
although
that's how, and also like in many, I mean, Elena's personal journey is like the disillusionment of your heroes, you know,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know, and I think that's such a cool dynamic that is,
Mm,
it's quite nuanced, right? Because there's
mm,
obviously like this strong emotional connection,
yeah,
and
for sure.
like you said, the need for stability, the you know, just how dependent emotionally as well
Mm,
as like, you know, logistically, physically,
yeah.
she is on him. But there's also like this strong kind of coming of age
Exactly.
element, right?
Mm,
To the like where you kind of have to, you know, it sort of mirrors that like growing up and realizing your parents don't know everything, and like
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
there's like a whole bunch of,
Yeah.
you know, of things that you have to come to conclusions about on your
Mm,
own. So yeah, I
yeah. Thanks. Yeah. No.
can definitely see.
And just reacting to, and just kind of realize, I love writing characters where they're like, I really don't want to do this, but I have to, because
Right.
if I don't, worse things are going to happen. And it's just like, I did it with my neutrally as well, where it's like, all I want to do is just go, run away and give up, but I can't, because if I do, the world will end. And so just putting these people in these horrible situations. But yeah, no, but as coming back to your question, it was exactly that. It was that dynamic between the two of them. And I think that's what people ultimately read those books for, you know. And some people like the demons and things, but I think the Elena von Volt relationship is definitely the core of that trilogy.
So for both of you, was it something where you were? I mean, I'm sure you were contracted at a certain point to do a trilogy, but when you were writing it and formulating it out, and you realized like Jade Legacy has a lot of time skips. I think it's like, it's been a while now,
That's
maybe
right, it does.
24
Yeah,
Yeah.
years
Yep.
through that, and then
I've forgotten
Richard
that.
has a whole bunch of stuff going on in that one. So for both of you, was there ever a point where you're like, oh, maybe this would be better as a 4-book series, or were you just like, if there's more story, it's because I'm adding too much, so therefore I would rather a tight trilogy? Like, how do you think that worked for
That
both
was
of you?
very much my attitude, Kyle. Like exactly
Yeah.
what you said. I was like, I am gonna be damned if this becomes 4 books. Like I was very,
I haven't got
I
it
was
in me.
highly,
I got nothing in the
yeah. It's
tank.
like I don't got a 4th book. Sorry, but I was very set from the start that like the 3 books would each have their own distinctive character to them, and my goal was that people would disagree about which of the 3 books was the best, and I think I've
Yeah.
succeeded, because I
Yeah.
absolutely have seen quite, you know, strong disagreements about which of the 3 books people like the most. If you like a more tight, contained clan warfare story, you're going to like Jade City the most. If you like
Absolutely,
international intrigue, right,
yeah.
then you're going to like Jade War the most. And if you like the family saga and like the, a long kind of intergenerational story, you're like Jade Legacy the most. So my goal wasn't really like, it wasn't bounded by length so much as the tone of each novel and what each novel was trying to accomplish. So I knew going into the third book that it was just going to be a bear. Like I knew I was like, this will be as long as it needs to be, but it's one book. It doesn't make sense as two books because the one book has to hang together as an intergenerational story. So that's, at no point was I tempted. Also, because I was like, I don't know if you felt this, Richard. At some point writing that trilogy, I was like, I am so ready for this to be done. Like I love
definitely.
I love a long story, but like I also love a story that ends. And like our genre does not always have the most fantastic track record.
It doesn't. It's funny. It's really weird to say that, Fonda, because I had the same approach where I wanted the first book to be a focused procedural, the second book to be like a sort of political drama, and the third book to sort of quite lean into the afterlife elements of it, and be more of a horror. So
it definitely goes horror.
It does. It does do that. And I also I think I've seen a few comments about the third book, and some people think, there should have been a fourth book, or there's too much in the third book, or whatever. And I don't agree, and I think people. I was speaking to Jay Christoph about this a little while ago. We did an event together at the beginning of the year.
Let's just pick up that name real quick.
He's a close mate of mine. And we were saying, no, he's not. We were saying that people think someone asked him, I think, would you go back to Nevernight? The Nevernight trilogy.
Right.
And we were saying, well, you think you want more of Nevernight, but you don't. What you want actually is the experience of reading it for the first time again, and you can never have that back.
Right.
And I think when I was writing Trials, and I was like, right, we're going to go to the Wolfmen, for a bit, and we're going to go to the North for a bit. And they were quite discrete sort of episodes, but I was like, if this wouldn't be interesting as a whole book. There's not enough material here. It would just be stretched. And so it is a bit of a canter through, but I'm like, this isn't the story I'm telling. I'm just, I've got to get through a few bits to get to the kind of the meat of the story. And I thought those parts were kind of just broadening the world, and kind of, I love writing things that kind of tantalize and hint at broader things, but don't really dive into them too heavily. So it's sort of like, I think, the closed door sort of mystery. And so I wanted to kind of just touch on these things, but I was like, there's not a whole book of material here, and there's not a story that I want to tell. So I'm just going to sort of tick off these bits. And so at no point did I think there's not a fourth book here. There's not a fourth book of material here. This is definitely all that's required to tell this story. And I think by the time I got to the third book, and as I said, the whole point of this trilogy is the dynamic between Helena and Von Bolt. And I was like, there's nothing else to explore in this relationship. I've hit all of the beats that I want to hit. So I mean, a fourth, or even a fifth, or God knows how many more books, that you're losing what makes that an interesting read. And so no is the answer. I and much like Fonda, I was like, I'm definitely done with this now. Like, it's nearly 500,000 words.
And I also feel like I would much rather leave readers wishing there was more than feeling like I overstayed my welcome.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I've had that experience. I feel like we all have, where like something is successful and it just spawns sequel after sequel after sequel until you're like, okay, you're really like scraping the bottom of the barrel for material now
and filling in every gap.
Exactly, and like
explaining every little thing.
If you do that,
Star Wars
no
problem.
room. Yeah, like I feel like if I did that, there'd be no room for fanfic writers, and I want them to have some places to go.
You don't have to worry about them. They'll find some stuff.
But yeah, like I'm very much with Richard. I think that like, the world is like, we're not there as writers to tell you everything about the world and give you all the details, right? We're there to chronicle this story about like these people, and we're giving you
Mhm.
the information that you need to understand it, right?
That's right.
But
Yeah.
you know, I found this when I was writing a novella, was that I had in my the novella was such a tighter package
Mm.
that by necessity the world
Mm.
building is very it's very lean, it's very economical.
Mm.
And the biggest complaint that I get about my novellas is just that they're novellas, because people are like, but
Sure.
I want it to
They
be
need to be
more.
longer.
I'm like, yeah,
Well,
I get it, but
not.
it's not. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you
Yeah, I
get
mean,
it.
I loved Untethered Sky, and I saw a couple people that were like, "Oh yeah, like I wish like it had more like," and I'm like, "But it told the story of this person.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
did these things, and
Yep.
you're in and out, and
And
the ending
for
of
those
that is
people,
really great." So
I would like them to know that it started off as a novel and it
Mm.
wasn't working.
oh,
And it was
yeah.
only when I reimagined it as a novella that
Mm.
it worked. And if
Yeah.
the end result is people are like, oh, but I wanted more, I'm like, great. You know,
That's
it's like
perfect.
going to a Michelin starred restaurant and you got a
Yeah,
meal
yeah.
and you're like, wow, that like roast bone marrow was amazing. I could have eaten the platter. No, you couldn't. You could. You
No.
think you could because it tasted
Yeah.
so good, but you
That's
only
right.
need that much bone marrow because it's
Yeah, yeah.
it's that rich. It's, you know,
Mm.
you don't actually want a whole platter of it. You think you do.
I think it was Ian Banks, obviously before he died, he was saying that like the story that it's not like I've got this kind of secret vault of knowledge and I'm just drip feeding you, like there's no story outside the story that I'm telling. You know, it's like it's not like I'm withholding information from you. The story that I'm telling is all the information that exists in this tale. Because people were, I think, constantly hounding him for kind of more background about the culture and and he was like, there isn't any, like it's it doesn't exist. I've made it all up.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of, so here's a thought I want to run by both of you and what you think about it, especially over time as things have changed. So I've noticed, even in my like pretty short relative time reading fantasy, that and Brandon Sanderson's my favorite author. I have a whole Brandon Sanderson. I'm not slandering Brandon Sanderson at all, but Sanderson and the MCU kind of together have changed this. Like, we've gotten really into interconnected stories.
Yeah.
And so now the readership, I think, has changed. And I've even noticed where like people read like the Dark Tower and stuff, where like Stephen King has novels that just kind of reference it. I've noticed over time that people feel like now they have to catch and understand every little piece of a novel. And I'm not saying there's never been people that felt that way now, but I've noticed it's way more, I guess people are trained to look into every little piece and be like, well, what is this going to be a new thread or a new thing that's explained? Sure. And in my bubble, I feel like it is those two main pillars. It's MCU and the Cosmere, kind of retraining readers to expect that every little thing will be leading to something else. Right. And the gamification of maybe the details. Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
I definitely like, if there's definitely stuff in my books where if you were a kind of eagle-eyed, if you were the type of reader who was eagle-eyed and did find satisfaction and pleasure from reading in that way, there are things there are definitely those Easter eggs that exist, and I do sometimes like putting them in just to see, because very, very occasionally someone will message me and say, oh my god, is that thing? And I'll be like, yeah. And that's just fun, that's just a fun way. But like, I mean, ultimately, as I said earlier, when I was writing Grave Empire, I was like, this has got to be, for everyone's sake, a standalone trilogy of novels. Like, I don't ever want my books to sort of feel like homework. And so, I think each book, I think every first book in a trilogy should be a book that can be read at any time by anybody. That books 2 and 3, fine. They're obviously following on from the first book. But when I was first getting into writing the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, I was like, and I was getting into the industry more broadly. You very quickly realize, when you start to see the numbers, that most people will only read the first book of a series, and that's the one you've really got to nail. And so when I approach any series now, I think, right, I'm gonna write 2 plot lines here. I'm gonna write a plot line which spans the whole trilogy, and I'm going to write a plot line that definitely terminates at the end of book 2 with a satisfying conclusion, because a lot of people will stop there, and if they haven't felt like they've read an entire book, it's not a very satisfying reading experience to my mind. So with Justice of Kings, you can just read the Justice of Kings. I do think it concludes quite nicely, and then you can just leave it there, and many have. But but then there's the lingering plot threads that go through the trilogy, and then you've got the trilogy of trilogies plot threads. But I do think, personally, they should stand alone as much as possible, because otherwise, what you end up with, and it's like, I fell out of the MCU basically after Infinity War. I picked up a bit, but I was like, I didn't have the time to watch, 10 episode
same.
TV series to understand the X, Y, Z. And it starts to, and it was the same with Star Wars. It starts to feel like homework, because I'm not enjoying watching these programs for their own sake. I'm only watching them because I feel like I need to put in the legwork to understand what's going on here. And even though I imagine, I don't know this, but even though I imagine that the big tentpole releases are supposed to stand alone, I watched, I think it was Multiverse. I went on a long flight. I flew back to London recently, and I watched a few Avengers movies, and I watched Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And I was like, I didn't watch WandaVision. I watched an episode of it, so I'm aware of the.
You can't do that with those two. Yeah, no.
Right, and I was like, but there's obviously a lot of backstory I'm missing here, because I don't get this. I don't understand this. I'm not an idiot, but I'm watching the movie and I'm like, there's definitely some backstory, some crucial context I've missed here, and it really just took me out of it. So I think, especially first books of trilogies, they've got to read a self-contained novel. And then people will read it, and I think already from early readers of Grave Empire, because the arcs have gone out now, people are saying, I haven't read the Empire of the Wolf. This is my first Richard Swan novel. But I loved it, or whatever. And that's great. That sentence is what I want to see. In the reviews. I'm not familiar with his work, but I love this book. I didn't feel like I needed to read it. But I still. And I was like, that's how I know I've got the balance right. And then if people did go back to Empire of the Wolf, they'd be like, oh, that's interesting. That's that little reference that I picked up on, or that's that place name that I recognize. That's the way to do it, personally. But when you're Brandon Sanderson, you can probably do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, for better or worse, I just don't have the patience. I'm sorry. No. I'm sorry. I mean, Richard, what you described is why I wasn't able to really enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine, because individually I love those characters. I remember when the movie was announced, I was so stoked for it. I was like, I love Deadpool. I love Wolverine. This is going to be a fantastic movie. But the entire movie is filled with references.
Right.
To the
Lots
rest
of references.
so many references that I felt like I wasn't able to enjoy it unless I went and watched another 25 hours of media, and I couldn't just enjoy it for what it was as a standalone story. I love having, little details in the story itself that connect, so often in unexpected ways. So in the Green Bone Saga, there's characters who show up as minor players in Jade City, and they show up again in Jade Legacy 20 years later, because of course they would. They've got promoted or they moved into a new role, and here they are. And so it was great, because I had this big cast of characters that when I was like, oh, something has to happen. Oh, of course, it would be that person. And I like to think that attention to detail, the little breadcrumbs that connect across the trilogy, enhance rereadability. But I personally have no interest in creating a giant interconnected thing that is requires somebody to invest hours and hours and hours in order to be able to enter it. And I also just don't. There's just too many different things I want to write. I wrote the Green Bone Saga. I stayed in a little longer to do a novella and some shorts, but then I went and did basically the complete opposite of the Green Bone Saga. I wrote, Untethered Sky is this little novella. Well, compared to a giant trilogy, it's very, it's ancient world versus modern. It's very self-contained single POV versus multi-POV. It's very rural versus urban. I basically went as far from the Green Bone Saga as you can go with my next work. And now, because I've done this big fantasy trilogy, I was talking to my editor at Orbit and saying, well, I have this other fantasy series that I want to work on, but I just did a big fantasy series. I'm going to do the sci-fi novel. So that's what I'm doing. So, from a career standpoint, maybe this not the absolute best fall in terms of oh, I've got all these. I have readers for my fantasy trilogy. I should, maybe hang on to them by doing another fantasy series. But you gotta do what's calling.
You've got to write what you want to write. Ultimately.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So I think there's too many different things that I want to write for me to be trying to create the MCU, the Fondaverse. That's just not.
Fondaverse.
You have to do it now. You've given it a name.
If you keep writing good things, eventually your brand will just become Fonda Lee writes good.
That's the ideal. That's the dream.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
the name becomes bigger than the title.
Right. I mean,
yeah,
that's it.
You can see that on the James S.A. Corey novels I have up there. They start the name of the title with it, and then at the
people
end
get
it's just a big name.
Quite annoyed because then the jackets don't match.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard Swan is still very small.
I mean, at least my titles are huge.
Thanks,
if you look at pretty much my books are they're huge font.
Are either of you familiar with Brian Lee Durfee, the author / YouTuber?
I know of him. Yeah.
So he very first of all, excellent reviewer. You should watch any of his reviews. But he reviewed Jade City and Jade War, and so because it's the title is on there, he'd be like Jade War, Jade City, and every time he said it, he would just shout the name. Just spectacular. What a guy!
Brilliant.
The books are being recovered, so they're going to have new trade paperback covers, which I'm very excited about.
Oh wow! Really?
No, I can't buy more copies of them. Jeez.
I actually really like the current ones. Of the current ones, I think Jade Legacy is my favorite. With the blue and the kind of the steamy river, and they're kind of that's Jade. I like those. They're sort of slightly minimal, but they almost could be which is probably deliberate. They could almost be just like almost like a Clive Cussler kind of thriller,
right.
Rather than
I think that came about a little bit inadvertently, mostly because they didn't know how to position it exactly.
Right.
So it was
surprised me.
Giant font.
Sure, big title. Done.
Yeah, big title. It's big.
Yeah. See, it's like if I was to just talk about a style of cover that I like, it doesn't speak to me, but I like especially the three of them together. Other side, you can kind of see them right over here. Like the three colors together speak, and it gives the vibe of the series in a good way.
Yeah, the colors somehow work because every special edition they stick with the colors. I don't know. I've got my Christmas colors.
Ryan, what you have to do is buy Legacy the day it comes out. Come on, man, go back in time and buy it then. What is a minor character that you guys both really liked writing that you maybe as you wrote them they got a little bit more depth to them that you really liked, or you just wish that people noticed them more often?
I had two. Sir Radamir, the sheriff, in the first book.
Radamir's fantastic.
Thanks, man. Yeah, he was only ever supposed to. I hadn't actually planned on taking him on for a ride on the whole trilogy, but I was like, I love this character too much. He's got to come along, because I always thought from a technical writing perspective, Radamir and Bressinger kind of fulfilled the same role in the book, and so I thought those characters might clash, but actually they actually played off each other really nicely. So I was pleased I did that. And then my other one is Severina von Osterlin, who's the Templar Margrave of Sudenburg, who has this kind of like crisis of faith in the third book. Some of my favorite parts of that trilogy are when she and Helena are discussing the nature of faith, and she decides she's still going to take comfort from belief, even if the creatures in the afterlife are ultimately indifferent / capricious. And those are my favorite. That and the conversation that Helena and von Bolt have at the beginning of Trials about why you can't just kill someone for committing a crime. I was like, I'm getting into the weeds of jurisprudence here. I'm on a hobby horse. Yes, Severina and Radamir were my two favorite minor characters, and Heinrich, the dog.
Well, one of mine has to be Barrow, just because
I hate Barrow, but in that good way, yeah.
I know
I kind of hate him.
I'm so proud of him because people hate him so much. It's
He is the
things
cab
just
driver at
don't
the
know.
end of Jade Legacy, isn't
He
he?
absolutely is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I was like,
Yeah.
I feel like this is definitely him, but I might
Yes.
Yeah.
be
No,
good.
yeah, of
I'm
course.
glad I got that
Well,
reference.
since we spoiled that, I actually do have a question about that
Oh,
last
sorry.
scene. Yeah, it was one of those things
Anyone
where
who doesn't want to be spoiled who
Yeah,
hasn't read
sorry,
yeah,
it,
well,
stop listening in about a
peace
minute.
out at this point. Hang out for a little while.
So I have a friend, Jimmy from the Fantasy Network, who recently did a discussion of Jade Legacy, and one of the things he talked about is at the end he didn't realize that was Barrow, and how I might be misquoting him, Jimmy, but like the question I have is the arc that goes through with the non-clan or the clanless. How did that come through the series for you? Because they get more and more prevalent, and it kind of goes with the I didn't think I was going to ask this question, so I didn't formulate it. Never mind. We'll just move on. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know we were doing spoilers, but I had a question about that, and I just
That's my fault. That's on me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot.
If it
But
comes
it's been
back
out
to you,
for a
let me
few
know.
years now.
No worries.
Yeah. Maybe someone.
But yeah, you're talking about how much you like writing Barrow.
Yeah, I mean, he was very refreshing to write because he was such a different perspective. He was like the true outsider. And I've talked many times about how I didn't intend for him to be a recurring character. And then he just turned out to be so useful to me as an author because he presented such a different point of view on the clans and on that society. So he ended up just he was just fun. He was fun for me to write. And then the other character that I have this fondness for is like a minor character named Vin the Sniper, who shows up throughout the series, but he just has like a really cool power at the end where it's like I got to use like jade powers with high powered sniper rifles, and that was fun.
Very cool.
And plus he just has a cool name. So yeah, it's just sort of like
there's some good names,
minor character.
like there's Sharp Ricky, I remember,
Oh, yeah.
Good old Sharp Ricky. Yeah,
Good
I like
old
some
Sharp
of the little
Ricky.
names of the clan leaders and stuff. Yeah, Ait Mata is fantastic. What a character. And I'm blanking on the oh my god, who's the priest in Justice of Kings, the villain?
Flavor.
Flavor, yeah. Flavor is
Everybody loves Flavor.
Fantastic
What a
villains.
tool.
Yeah, both
what
of
a
them.
piece of work, that guy.
I've got actually my favorite villain I've ever written in Grave Empire. I've got there's 3 POVs, and one of them is the bad guy. And he is just such an arsehole, and it's so fun to really just indulge your ears.
It is incredibly fun to write
just
these
doing
characters
horrible
who are
things
just
to people.
pieces of shit. Like
real,
it's like pretty cathartic, isn't it? In some weird, strange way.
It is. I love the kind of the villain who isn't like, because Claver's quite a melodramatic villain, and I deliberately made him very hateable, and he's very over the top, and he's very annoying, and he's annoying. Whereas Lamprecht von Oldenburg, who's the new villain in Grave Empire, isn't so much that. He's a clever guy. And there's just an incredible banality and ruthlessness to his evil, and so it was like just psychopathic. And I love villains who are a bit like Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men.
Right.
Unstoppable. They're terrifying in that they just seem to lack all empathic capability.
Right. Because you can kind of understand a villain who's like motivated by hate, or
exactly,
by anger, right? But like villains like that you're like not
truly frightening.
They're so inhuman.
Exactly
right?
that, and are willing to just kill random people on the on the street. Like those are the frightening ones, and so it was fun writing them anyway.
Yeah, I liked Justice August. I was very
good.
Yes, me too. Yeah,
I didn't give her enough screen time, and I'm going to bring her back for this novella in October.
Oh, excellent!
Good.
Another reason.
And I thought, because I sort of hinted at her kind of animal controlling powers, and I thought I never really fully explored that, so I'm going to do a bit with that in the new little novella, and just kind of like lean into that a little bit, because I thought I liked her a lot, and she was a kind of interesting foil to Von Volt, but never really got enough time. So
Yep.
I'm gonna bring it back. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Well, we're
Give a
nearing the
review.
end of our time,
Mm.
but I cannot have a live stream without mentioning The Wire. I think I'm legally contracted. Fonda, have you ever watched The Wire?
I have watched The Wire.
Okay, so I understand why The Godfather is the go-to. Like I get it. Like it totally makes sense. But
Yeah.
even when I was reading Jade City, and especially while reading Jade Legacy, I was like, this is just fantasy The Wire. And I've been telling people for years,
Yeah.
I'm like, if you love Green Bone, watch The Wire. If you love The Wire, read Green Bone. Because man,
That's the
there's
highest
so many.
praise there. My work is done, Kyle.
Yeah, I just
but-
like in Jade Legacy where you get all of the stuff going on where that's like, everything connects. Like, and every decision that one person makes has all the way across the country has a new problem because of it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is Fonda Lee has definitely watched The Wire, so I'm glad that I was right.
So I had not
Yeah.
watched. I hadn't watched The Wire until after I wrote the Green Bone Saga.
Oh
Which is
no, don't tell me
surprising
that.
to
This is about
That's
20 years
crazy.
old.
Yeah.
Just because people were like, "You must have watched The Wire," and I was like, "No." And they're like,
No.
so it wasn't until, but it was one of those things where it was like, oh yeah, like I can. It is funny sometimes as an author, people will be like, well, this is, you're clearly just like
Clearly
ripping
inspired
off
by
this.
XYZ.
Or like
And I'm
clearly
like, yeah, I've
inspired
never read
by
it.
this. And you're
Yeah.
like, no. But like,
I don't even know what that is.
you know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it kind of goes. I mean, it's one of those like every story has been told kind of phenomenon
There's
things,
only
right?
like
Where it's
7
like,
stories. Or
yeah,
something.
we're all pulling
Yeah.
from the same
Exactly.
cultural inspirations.
I read I saw an anecdote from Ryan Cahill, who I guess in his series he has like blades that they come out and they fight with them and they're all shiny and stuff. And he was just so scared that people would be like, "Oh, it's a lightsaber," but because it's the modern fantasy era, people were like, "Oh, you just copied Brandon Sanderson's shard blades." And he's like, "I've never even read Brandon Sanderson. Like these are lightsabers." Like
couldn't have
Right,
told
right.
you that.
Yeah.
Someone said that sorry, I love Star Wars prequels. I love them. They came out at just the right time for me. I was about 9 or 10 when Phantom Menace came out. So they're a huge nostalgia. I love the And someone said recently, I think a couple of people actually said, Empire of the Wolf is basically the Star Wars prequels, and the Justices are like the Jedi Order, right? And I was like, my
oh
God,
wow.
you're right. Like I obviously, but I genuinely hadn't made the connection at all. And I was like, that's so, because I genuinely love, and I'm very vocal about how much I love the prequels, and yet still I hadn't made that parallel at all. And I was like, shit, that's a really solid comparison, actually. Like it hadn't occurred to me even once, but it's bang on. So it happens all the time, I think. And they didn't mean it in like a you've ripped them off, but like it was more like there are clear parallels here. And I was like, you're absolutely right. There are clear parallels, but not the ones that I'd consciously employed in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why, like, as an author, like I occasionally run across like those aspiring authors who are like working on their first book and they're like afraid someone is going to steal their idea.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude,
don't worry about it.
Don't worry about that at all. Like, it's like just a non-issue.
Try to get like
We're all stealing from each other all the time.
Yeah.
I'm actually gonna. So I have a quick story. I write a little, and for the longest time, I have a really big interest in Three Kingdoms era China. Like, just has always been just my bag. And so for the longest time, I wanted to write like a Bernard Cornwell inspired like retelling of an old man telling the story of the whole war. And I chose a guy who is actually, he was a real dude. He isn't very important, and most people don't really know about him. And he lived through the whole thing. I was like, oh, I'm gonna tell. And I worked on it 3 separate times. One time, my computer crashed and I lost like 70, 80 pages of it. And then I redrafted I was going to do like 9 or 10 novels. And I was like, yeah, like I totally, this is going to be my thing. I got to research ancient China. Yeah. And then my now friend, Baptiste Payson Wu, did it first. Exactly what I just said. He's inspired by Bernard Cornwell. Same main character, same amount of books. And I was like, that is outrageous that happened.
It's just you from a parallel timeline who's
exactly so don't tell people your ideas, aspiring writers. But I was happy for him. I'm like, oh good, I don't have to write this now, I can just read it, like
relax.
I mean
that sounds like
you could give the same idea to 2 writers and it would just end up
absolutely for sure. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, that's it.
So no.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining me tonight. This was fantastic. And I just want to
pleasure.
say to both of you, I'm so excited for your upcoming books. And
Excellent.
I love your trilogies. And thank you so much for writing. Is there anything you guys want to say or pitch to anybody, or where they can find you going forward? Fonda, you want to start? Or
No,
Richard?
no,
I mean, I'm. You can find me online. I mean, I am increasingly off of social media to the benefit of my mental health, I believe.
Smart.
But my website is fondalee.com, and you can find me on other places. Instagram at fonda.lee. I have a book coming out January 7th. So I'll be on tour for that and hitting a few different spots. I'll be at Dragonsteel for the first time in a couple of weeks. And yeah.
My good
Otherwise,
friend
that's me.
Bookborn will be interviewing you in Seattle for the release
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
book.
yeah.
So you guys should go to that if you're in the
Yeah.
Seattle area.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
Definitely.
Richard?
I have. Oh, actually, I can see it. I've got an arc. Hold on.
Oh, I should have brought.
Oh.
Of course, I should have brought an arc.
Found
I'm
it.
actually in an office right now, and so like all my books are not
Ah.
here.
I'm
like, I
actually-
should have
I'm-
brought an arc deck to hold it up.
I'm quite lucky because we're moving back to the UK in December, and so this is the only arc I've. They just sent me a box full of them, and this is the only one I've still got out. This is my next book is coming out in February. Grave Empire, part of the Great Silence trilogy, and I've got novella, Von Volt prequel novella coming out next October. That's with Grimdark magazine, but that will be across all formats. So that's very exciting. And you can find me across various social media websites, and I have a website as well. It's called stonetemplelibrary.com, and there's a newsletter on there if you're interested in signing up to that.
Richard, I have to tell you, in my science fiction novel, there is an event called The Great Silence. And
Is it?
so when I saw that it was the name of your trilogy, I was like,
Motherfucker! My God,
You stole from me.
It happens so frequently, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
but I was like, you're getting to it first, so you're good. You're good.
Beat to the punch.
Yeah, people are going to
People
come
think
up
I
to you,
ripped off you.
Fonda, later.
Oh,
They're
I
going to be
know.
like,
They're
did
gonna
you
be like,
know
"Well,
that this is the name of his trilogy?
Ripped off Richard Swan.
Oh, Alan's enjoying Grave Empire. Excellent. I'm supposed to be having a chat with him next year, I think. I love Alan.
Awesome. Yeah, Alan is currently reading Grave Empire. Also, Richard was telling me backstage, I think people would like to know this, that he has asked our good friend Alan Latin questions for some projects. Alan helped him with some Latin, so I think that's really
Alan's
cool.
always helping with a bit of Latin.
I have a Latin expert.
I did a little bit of Latin at school for about 2 or 3 years, and so I have a very rudimentary grasp of it. But Alan is obviously a teacher of Latin, so he's just knowledge vastly eclipsed mine. So every time I have a Latin question, I just go, it's like having a little Latin teacher on retainer. It's like my sort of 15-year-old's dream. Like, yes. I always love shoving Latin in my books. Anyway.
And while you held up the arc of Grave Empire, and I just want to say, first of all, I love that cover. I think it's really, really awesome. And what I really like too is that I love the covers of the original trilogy, but I like that these ones are totally different because it does sell that vibe that like it is a standalone trilogy.
That's right. That was a deliberate
super
choice.
cool.
It's also got on it, I don't know if you saw, but an armored shark, an armored great white shark.
Okay, that's cool.
I've gone mermaids. I've gone Grimdark mermaids in the new trilogy. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do mermaids. I've got this thing. I'm on a Discord with a bunch of other authors, and this is a long running joke because I've been talking about doing a mermaids novel for years now. And so I finally Orbit.
You found a way to work them in.
I finally worked them in, and I initially pitched Orbit like a trilogy that was all the mermaids, and they were like.
Okay, but I'm actually fascinated by what you would do with an entire trilogy of mermaids, Richard.
You know what? This is a whole other conversation. It was good though. But anyway, so they said that's not really on brand for you, Rich. But let's call the mermaids back. So I was like, oh, fair enough. So I've worked them in. But they're in there. It's good stuff. I'm really.
This is your On Stranger Tides. You know, you got your Jack Sparrow to get everybody in, but you're really going to do a whole movie about mermaids. Yeah,
absolutely correct. Book 2, just all mermaids. I've stepped out. I'm joking. They're in there though. They're in there.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me, and chat. Thank you guys so much for joining. It was fantastic, and
thanks, mate.
Yeah, check out these authors. If you've loved one, read the other. They're fantastic, both of them. And thanks, guys. See you guys
Take
later.
care.
Take care. Bye bye.